Okay. I want to begin today's talk by saying thank you to Sarah, Andrea, Anthony, Shahana, Indranila, and everyone else at the Center for South Asia and SASLI for inviting me to present this talk. I really enjoyed working at the Center for South Asia in 2022 and developed an entirely new set of skills working there. I was also associated with SAFLI and worked as a Hindi language partner in the summers of 2022 and 2023. In a particularly interesting language practice session, I remember visiting the UW-Madison Arboretum one afternoon with two of my students and discussing Hindi words for nature: trees, birds, flowers, rocks, and creeks. Also, thank you to all of you for being here. Today's talk, Intermediality and Multilingualism in Indian Theatre, is drawn from my dissertation research, which I completed quite recently in August 2024 from the Interdisciplinary Theatre Studies program at UW-Madison. I am, of course, indebted to my advisor, Professor Aparna Dharwarkar, for how the research took shape and developed over 7 years, and my dissertation committee members, Anthony Cerulli, Darshana Sridharmini, Paula Hernandez, and Vinay Dharwarkar, for their encouragement and valuable feedback throughout the process. In my research, I examined specific performances by contemporary practitioners of Indian theatre that employ an intermedial form. Within theatre studies, intermediality has been defined in terms of the effect of digital technology on theatre. In the context of Indian theatre, I identify new forms of intermediality by studying linguistic, formal, sensory, and transmedial interactions through theatre within the work of contemporary practitioners. These practitioners employ a collaborative and devised process of creation with people from diverse artistic and cultural backgrounds. Practices of intermediality in Indian theatre include, and this is what I will be expanding on in this lecture, the combination of multiple languages and forms of performance, communication through multiple sensory modalities, incorporating digital technology on stage, and combining theatre with other artistic and non artistic disciplines. Narratives and forms travel and transform between multilingual theatre and film in India, demonstrating transmedial connections between these forms. The theatre makers I discuss in my research emerge from different parts of India: Bhopal, Pondicherry, Chandigarh, and Delhi. They work in different languages, and the specific performances that I discuss in detail employ the languages Chhattisgarhi, Hindi, English, Tamil, French, Punjabi, and Indo Pakistani Sign Language. Today's talk will focus on the theoretical framework of my research, intermediality in the context of Indian theatre. In my definition, multilingualism within the theatrical process, including translation and adaptation in processes of creation, and the use of multiple languages in performances, also constitutes a form of intermediality. Perhaps one could call this linguistic intermediality. I will speak a little about historical forms of Indian theatre that exhibited certain forms of intermediality to provide you with a context for this practice, but focus primarily on theatre and film created in different languages after 2000. I structure my talk by focusing on four different practices of intermediality that I've identified within Indian theatre. One, combining multiple languages and forms of performance. Two, communicating through multiple sensory modalities. Three, combining theatre with other artistic and non artistic disciplines. And four, exchanges between different media, particularly theatre and film. But first, I want to give all of you an example of what I mean by intermediality in Indian theatre. In 2018, disturbed by an increasing number of caste based murders in Tamil Nadu, Indian Ostrom, a theatre group based in Pondicherry, created Chandala the Impure, a performance addressing the issue of caste violence faced by intercaste couples in India. The play was commissioned by the Francophone Theatre Festival in Limousin, France. Chandala transposes Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet to Tamil Nadu and places the lovers, Jack and Janani, in Villupuram, a village stratified by caste. Chandala draws inspiration from a real incident, the caste-based violence inflicted upon the intercaste couple Kaushalya and Shankar in Udumalpet, Tamil Nadu. In 2016, the couple were publicly attacked by goons hired by Kaushalya's family. He lost his life, but Kaushalya survived and went on to sue her parents in the local high and supreme courts. Many of the goons and Kaushalya's parents received sentences of life imprisonment at first, but were acquitted later on. Kaushalya has become an advocate for caste justice, sharing her story and helping intercaste couples survive. I want to point out some interesting intermedial features of the play. Chandala combines forms on several different levels. At the level of narrative, the performance combines testimonies and real incidents of caste based violence with the narrative framework of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The performance also weaves in folk forms of performance, music, and puppetry, such as Karan Kaliyattam, a form of Theyyam from northern Kerala, Dappan Kuthu, or funeral dancing, the playing of the Parai drum, and Katta Bomalatam puppets. These forms of performance are not included uncritically, but performers of Dappan Kuthu, Gana songs, um, and Karan Kaliyattam deliberate on the conditions of performing these forms. In addition, film and film spectatorship occupy a central place in Chandala as an intermediary space where people from different caste, class, and religious backgrounds interact with each other. Consequently, the performance space incorporates a large movie screen that enables performers to interrogate caste relations that stratify a cinema hall. The scenes that are set in the cinema hall are played before the imposing screen, playing clips from advertisements, gory warnings against smoking that usually appear before films begin, clips from adult films featuring Shakila, and trailers from blockbusters featuring Rajnikant. Pankaj Rishikumar's 2019 documentary film Janani's Juliet documents Indian Ostrom as they devise and rehearse Chandala, centering Kaushalya's testimony in the process. Using theatrical creation and rehearsals as a narrative framework, the documentary film explores the reality of caste based violence and discrimination in Tamil Nadu. The documentary follows the theatre group as the director and performers attempt to understand Janani by meeting Kausalya, listening to her experiences, and re-performing her experiences as Janani's story. Processes of devising parts of the play are intercut with performers listening to Kaushalya narrating her own experiences. Kaushalya's testimony is overlaid with the embodiment of these events on stage, revealing the way in which her story lives on through Indian Ostrom's performance. In revealing how Indian Ostrom adapts Kaushalya's story through theatre, Janani's Juliet ultimately centers Kaushalya as the protagonist of Indian Ostrom's play, and through her testimony shows audiences how the caste system impacts the freedom of women, irrespective of caste, and directly results in the furtherance of oppressive ideas and ultimately murder. I was in the process of writing a chapter about this interrelated performance and documentary film when Pa Ranjit's Tamil film Nashathiram Nagargiradu, or A Star Shoots Across the Sky, was released on Netflix in 2022. This film was shot at Indian Ostrom Theatre in Pondicherry and fictionalizes the premise of Janani's Juliet. The film depicts the experiences of a fictional theatre group creating a performance about caste violence in Pondicherry, and some of the characters in the film visibly resemble members of Indian Ostrom who feature within Janani's Juliet. The fictional Indian Ostrom is an ensemble of diverse characters, many of whom are in non heteronormative and non traditional relationships, depicting gay, lesbian, transgender, intercaste, and interfaith love. The film centers on Rennie, a strong, outspoken, and fearless woman who's from a caste oppressed community, and reveals the discrimination that she faces in different kinds of interpersonal relationships. Despite being part of a progressive theatre group in Pondicherry, some members of the group have internalized casteist biases, which are revealed and interrogated throughout the film. Towards the end, a performance of the play addressing caste violence that the fictional Indian Ostrom creates is violently disrupted by a right wing agent, igniting a fight between the group and the agent. The film ends with members of the fictional Indian Ostrom recuperating on the beach after the attack and suddenly noticing a star shooting across the sky. Taken together, Chandala Janani's Juliet and Nachatiram Nagar Giradhu form a transmedial collection of stories that explore different facets of caste in contemporary life. In other words, the films and performances evoke and converse with each other, such that the real experiences that they address move into newer medial frameworks to give rise to newer interpretations and stories that address other experiences of caste violence. They use different languages. A performance in Tamil inspires a documentary film using English, Hindi, Tamil, French, and Indo Pakistani Sign Language, and a Tamil fictional film. Located and set in the real Indian Ostrom theatre space in Pondicherry, all of them present different perspectives on and interpretations of casteist violence in Tamil Nadu. Dalit forms of performance and Kattabomalatham puppets are transformed into post-memorial artifacts symbolizing intercaste love in the way that they are incorporated into the performance Chandala, and they make their way into the films Janani's Juliet and Nachathiram. In Nachathiram, performers listen to an Oppadi by Muthamat in a rehearsal session of the fictional Indian Ostrom. The song of lament that Mama or Kali sings and Muthamal's Oppadi within Nachathiram initiate processes of collective mourning with the audience. By staging these folk forms, the three performances and films share space and cultural capital with local performers, bringing regional performers and performances into the purview of national and international audiences, and interrogating the caste-based marginalization of these forms. Testimony and video recordings that provide evidence of caste-based atrocities are important devices that resist the forgetting of casteist violence, and consequently, all three sources, Chandala, Janani's Juliet, and Nachathiram, incorporate testimony and CCTV footage of casteist violence. Chandala and Janani's Juliet focus on Kaushalya and Shankar's story, while Nachathiram includes a testimony of multiple survivors, including a montage of CCTV footage of caste-based murders, emphasizing the enormity of casteist violence. While the theatrical performance Chandala incorporates a film screen and discusses films and film spectatorship, the films Janani's Juliet and Nachathiram Nagar Giradhu embed theatre, specifically the theatre group Indian Ostrom, and the rehearsal and performance space of Indian Ostrom within their narratives. Both films are shot in the cinema hall turned rehearsal and performance space that Indian Ostrom Theatre is located in, and both films explored the ways in which theatre artists and theatre as a medium can address the politics of caste and love. The evolution of the story, from Kaushalya's experiences and Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet in Indian Ostrom's Chandala, to Pankaj Rishikumar's Janani's Juliet and Pa Ranjit's film Nachathiram, foreground a multitude of stories of caste discrimination, revealing the systemic nature of casteist violence. Even within their fictional frames, the plays and films embed citations to real stories of caste-based violence that re-perform the stories of those who were murdered to ensure their presence in collective memory. This collection of performances and two films then displays at least three of the kinds of intermediality that I outlined in the beginning: the combination of folk and modern forms of performance, the incorporation of video and film within theatre, and the exchange of narratives and forms across multilingual theatre and film. While these performances and films are quite recent, intermediality, in the way that I define the practice, is not a new phenomenon within Indian theatre. The historical form of Parsi theatre that emerged in the late 1860s was multilingual, incorporated folk performers, and combined folk forms with Western influences. Drew influences from a wide variety of sources, including folk and religious stories, historical legends, and European musicals, and traveled to diverse locations in Southeast and Southeast Asia, bringing new modes of spectatorship and cultural influences to these places. With the arrival of talkie films in 1931, the infrastructure of Parsi theatre, including writers, performers, directors, sets, and costumes, and even theatre buildings, transformed into the early film industries in Bombay and Calcutta. Intermedial forms developed by practitioners of Dalit theatre, folk performers, and the IPTA created a legacy of political theatre in India that future practitioners of Indian theatre continue to draw upon. Folk forms are repositories of knowledge, memories, and experiences of Dalit communities, and they contain ideas and experiences that mainstream culture neglects, undervalues, opposes, represses, or fails to recognize. The politically radical practice of Dalit theatre employs folk forms of performance to exhort audiences to recognize Dalit contributions that have been elided by mainstream cultural practices and makes visible Dalit oppression. Forms of Dalit theatre in different languages and from different parts of India combine folk and modern forms of performance to share historical, personal, and community experiences and deliver political messages. The Indian People Theatre Association, or IPTA, which started in 1943 as the cultural wing of the Communist Party of India, influenced the practice of adapting local forms to create performances that address contemporary political issues. The IPTA was a nationwide progressive theatre movement, and in each region, artists used regional languages and local folk forms, such as Burra Katha in Andhra Pradesh, Tamasha in Maharashtra, Nacha in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, and Jatra in Bengal, to create political performances and sketches that would reach the largest number of people. By translating plays into different languages, the IPTA instilled anti colonial and anti fascist sentiments within diverse audiences through linguistic diversification. And by experimenting with an amalgamation of theatre forms, drawing from regional, national, and international sources, the IPTA created an innovative intermediate form for performing socially and politically committed theatre. Folk performers are rarely owners of cultural capital, and they collaborate with others who possess cultural influence to transform their conditions and practice into performances of mobilization. Intermedial performances can be one way in which folk performers can transform their cultural labor into cultural capital. As performances created through collaborative processes with people from different artistic and cultural backgrounds, intermedial performance groups and spaces become an arena for the exchange of ideas, forms, practices, stories, experiences, and materials, leading to new forms of performance that emerge from this collaboration. It is the entry of these new forms, ideas, and experiences into the purview of Indian theatre, performance, and interdisciplinary art that endows intermedial forms with the ability to affect political interventions. Consequently, theatre practitioners who seek to create political theatre turn to practices of intermediality. Practitioners such as Habib Tanveer and Utpal Dutt created different kinds of intermedial performances that combined regional, folk, and modern forms of performance and were explicitly political. In Naya Theatre, located in Bhopal, Chhattisgarh, Habib Tanveer developed a process for creating performances collaboratively with local actors and folk performers, drawing upon the Chhattisgarhi language, the Nacha form of performance, among other regional languages and performance forms. Naya Theatre achieved national and international visibility with Charan Das Chor in 1974, which brought Chhattisgarhi Nacha actors and the Chhattisgarhi language to the Delhi stage. The story is based on a Rajasthani folk tale that Tanveer had heard from the writer and folklorist Vijayadan Detha, and the performance evolved out of improvisations by Nacha performers in a month-long workshop in Bhilai in 1974. I want to dwell for a little while on Habib Tanveer's work, specifically on his 2002 play Zehrili Hawa. Zehrili Hawa, or Poisonous Wind, examines the horrors of the Bhopal gas disaster. On December 2nd and 3rd, 1984, methyl isocyanate, or MIC, leaked from the Union Carbide plant manufacturing pesticides in Bhopal, causing the deaths of 30,000 people instantaneously and leading to diseases related to genetic mutations and inherited conditions in about 50,000 other people who had been exposed to the gas. Bhopal was the world's worst industrial disaster in human memory, and yet the ongoing trauma of survivors remains unacknowledged by the Indian state, by legal processes that denied survivors rightful compensation, and by Dow Chemicals, which bought the Union Carbide India Limited, or UCIL, plant in Bhopal, but refuses to accept responsibility for cleaning up the areas contaminated by the plant. Zehrili Hawa is a trilingual adaptation of Indian Canadian playwright Rahul Verma's English play Bhopal by Tanveer in Chhattisgarhi, Hindi, and English. Tanveer was invited by Verma to conduct a workshop with local actors in Montreal, where Verma had shared a one-page synopsis of the play with him. Tanveer dedicated the entire workshop to framing Verma's play, and a few years later, when Verma sent the play to him, he replied that he was interested in translating the play. The Canada Council for the Arts supported the translation, and Zehrili Hawa was first performed in December 2003 at Bharat Bhavan, Bhopal, to commemorate the disaster. Tanveer's play Zehrili Hawa depicts the prefiguration, event, and aftermath of the Bhopal gas disaster. Using short episodic scenes, the play views the real traumatic event of the Bhopal disaster through a fictional frame that closely follows real events. Characters emerge from a wide spectrum of locations and socio-economic backgrounds. Izzat, representing abject Bhopalis, is searching for a way to save her infant daughter, who has been poisoned by Carbide International's toxic waste. And Madiha is a local who works in the organization. Sonia, a Canadian doctor, is attempting to expose Carbide's violation of environmental laws and to help those who are affected by Carbide's unethical practices. Other characters include Devraj, the returned NRI factory manager, Jagan Lal, the corrupt politician, and Warren Anderson, the CEO of Carbide. The disaster is brought on by the corruption and incompetence of these men who face public scrutiny and house arrest for their crimes, despite being responsible for furthering policies and ignoring the warning signs that ultimately lead to the disaster. On the other hand, the women face grave injury, personal loss, and death. Zarina, Izzat's daughter, who was affected by Carbide's toxic waste, dies. Sonia loses her life trying to help others, and Madiha has a miscarriage after she is exposed to MIC. Using an intermedial form that uses multiple languages and embeds folk forms within realistic proscenium-based theatre, Zehrili Hawa exposes the unequal distribution of precarity brought on by neoliberal capitalism as the cause of the Bhopal gas disaster, and exhorts audiences to critically reflect on their own imbrication within the global in the neoliberal present. The use of three languages in Zehrili Hawa maintains the multilingualism of Bhopal. Izzat speaks in Chhattisgarhi, Madiha, Devraj, and Jaganlal speak in Hindi inflected with English, while Sonia, Swab, and Anderson speak in English and in Hindi. Characters also speak different languages to each other within scenes and switch between languages when required. Thus, Jaganlal speaks to Izzat in Chhattisgarhi when he pretends to sympathize with her for media attention and to gain her trust. Linguistic misunderstandings, such as those between Sonia and Izzat, reveal their inability to communicate effectively with each other. The other interesting intermedial characteristic of the play is its use of songs. The play begins with the song Zehrili Hawa, written by Tanveer, which reappears as a haunting motif at significant moments, making the ideological imperatives of the play clearer. The song acknowledges the death and grief that was brought on by the poisonous breeze that emanated from the UCIL plant by bringing up images of silent screams, lives, blistered hearts, and waves of blood. When Izzat shows Sonia the fake pills that the carbide affiliated doctor Hans Wheel had given her, the song appears a second time, describing the poisonous wind as suffocating and blinding, underscoring the precarity that Izzat faces because the corporation deems her life disposable. The refrain comes in a third time in the last scene when Jaganlal is giving his speech at the Montreal conference. The contrast between Jaganlal's insensitivity and the tragedy embedded in the song throws into sharp relief the state's refusal to heed the warnings posed by the Bhopal gas disaster and its failure to acknowledge the lives lost in Bhopal at the hands of Union Carbide. As the gas disaster is happening all around them, Izzat narrates a Gond story named Aise Ke His Bhagwan, or This is What God Said, in scene 16 to distract Madiha and other people who are injured and in pain. Tanveer adapted this story from a Gond myth of creation, which he updates to address the onset of the disaster. Izzat narrates a story of the creation of the world. Bhagwan, God, sitting on a leaf, rubs his hands together to produce dirt, from which he makes a crow. He tells the crow to find some land for him. The crow goes to the spider and crab, and together the three of them squeeze the turtle. The turtle spits out land. Spinning on top of the water, the spider spins a web, on top of which she places the land carefully. Bhagwan tears some of his hair and throws it on top of the land, creating trees. The trees are cut down to fashion agricultural implements that are dragged across the land to produce crops. The living creatures make merry and harvest the grain, which they store in the termite's nest. Izzat's audience eggs her on, asking, "What happened next?" in the manner of folk storytelling performances. Izzat improvises by adapting their current situation into the Gond story. She narrates that the harvested grain was stricken with pests, and men searched for a cure. It is their cure that killed her daughter Zarina. The song prefigures a moment of reversal. Madiha hears from Izzat that it was Carbide's toxic waste that had killed her daughter, not poverty, and that Sonia's research was not concocted, challenging her loyalty to the neoliberal corporation. The story symbolically addresses Izzat and Zarina's reality and is an encapsulation of the whole play. While the living creatures were able to create a world with Bhagwan's help, it is men who cause its destruction, a comment on the humanly wrought destruction of the environment. Reading the play in the present, Izzat's remediation of the Gond myth resonates with the resettlement of Gond Adivasis and the felling of the Hasdeo forests by the Parsa East and Kanta Basan coal mines constructed by the Adani Group and encouraged by the Modi government. Interestingly, Izzat's story is also one of collaboration and reflects the intermedial processes that created the performance itself. With its intermedial form, the incorporation of the Gond myth of creation in Izzat's story and songs, Zehrili Hawa exemplifies Tanveer's intermedial style that highlights the Chhattisgarhi language, embodies acts of translation on stage, and reworks regional myth and folklore to address contemporary issues, transporting them to wider audiences. The depiction of a wide range of characters, including marginalized Bhopalis and other women who are more well off but nevertheless affected by the Bhopal gas disaster, contrasted with the masculine corporate and state infrastructure, who are exploitative and powerful, demystify the differential power relations between these groups, and expose the unequal distribution of precarity brought on by neoliberal capitalism. As public, performative, and translatory acts, Naya Theatre's performances are able to address mechanisms of precarization by exposing and opposing the modes of exclusion by which the state constitutes itself. Their performances enable audiences to ask questions and think critically about their own reality, evoking a shifting in perceptions and a recognition of the modes of exclusion that unequally sustain some lives over others. As Naya Theatre's intermedial style demonstrates, within intermedial performances, folk forms are removed from their local contexts, recontextualized, and combined with or embedded within other forms to address social and political issues that may differ from their original themes, topics, and concerns. Intermediate performances may or may not intend to make particular social and political interventions. However, the collaborative process of creation, the staging of folk forms that are inherently subversive, and the innovative combining of folk and modern forms endow such performances with the potential to make social and political interventions. Despite this potential, hierarchies still structure groups that create intermediate performances. Differences of caste, class, religion, language, and region are deeply ingrained within individuals who collaborate in groups, and folk performers who participate in collaborative performances may continue to face exploitation, less pay, seasonal and uncertain work, financial dependency, humiliation, and exclusion. Nevertheless, intermediate performances harbor the potential for transformation. They challenge caste based hierarchies between forms of performance and question the exclusion of folk forms from the urban theatre space. They share cultural capital with folk performers by bringing folk forms before national and international audiences. Through a collaborative process of creation, the subversion inherent in folk forms is recontextualized and mobilized to address issues relevant to audiences and performers. Beginning in the late 1960s, drawing upon international political movements and combining local and international theatrical forms, practitioners in India created new intermedial forms of street protest and feminist theater. The Naxalbari uprising in 1967 and its violent suppression by the state, followed by the emergency instituted by Indira Gandhi between 1975 and 77, led to the politicization of cultural practice in India in the 1970s and 80s. In the 1970s, Badal Sarkar theorized and practiced a form of body centered, minimalist, free, and progressive theatre that he named Third Theatre, different from but drawing upon indigenous folk performances and Western inspired modern conventions of theatre. Sarkar conducted workshops with several groups of people in multiple regions in India: Bangladesh, Pakistan, Laos, and the UK. His methods influenced many future practitioners of intermediality within non dramatic, experimental, alternative, and post dramatic theatre in India, including proponents of street theatre and feminist theatre. One such group includes Kalakshetra Manipur, started in 1969 by Haisnam and Savitri Kanhailal. Kalakshetra's performances express intermediality through the performer's body, movement, and language. The non textual, body centered minimalist performance style is devised by performers and draws from multiple traditions of body culture, yoga, dance, myths, and legends from Manipuri storytelling, performance and movement traditions, and performances from other regions in India. Kalakshetra's Pebe adapts a Manipuri folktale about a mother bird's struggle to free her children from the clutches of a cat using the language Meitei, nonsensical phrases, body movements, gestures, and sounds. The folktale, drawn from Fungavari or fireside stories, portrays the mother bird successfully, Resisting the Cat. Kanhai adds an additional nightmare sequence into the performance in which the mother bird visualizes her children being captured and converted into Sanskritized cat culture, making the performance an allegory for the Sanskritization and homogenization of Meitei cultures. By subverting the familiar, Kalakshetra's performance presents a new interpretation of the story and highlights its relevance to contemporary reality, enabling audiences to perceive the story in a new light. Street theatre groups devise performances collectively and employ an intermedial form by combining folk, classical, and Western dramatic and performance forms with political pamphlets, wall posters, agitational speeches, and political demonstrations to address themes directly relevant to their audiences. Jan Natya Mancha or Janam was founded by student activists from Delhi University and in 1973 and popularized street theatre as a form for political campaigning and protest in India. In Karnataka, the street theatre group Samudaya was formed by Prasanna, a, a National School of Drama graduate in 1975, as a reaction to the emergency. The 1980s saw the intensification of the women's movement and public protests against gender discrimination and violence against women, rallying around issues such as the increasing number of dowry murders, violence against women in state and police custody, inflation on household products, and economic injustices in trade unions. Performances directed by women in the early 1990s demonstrated the liberation of the theatrical form from its dominance from the word and mimetic representation, and strategies of adaptation, rewriting, hybridity, and performativity. In these performances, material from one medium, artistic or non-artistic, is transferred into the medium of theater, accompanied by transformations in content and style, making them intermedial in form. The performances of Anuradha Kapoor, Neelam Mansingh Chaudhary, Kirti Jain, Maya Rao, and Anamika Haskar, among others, deviated from both realist forms of performance and the cultural nationalism of the theatre and of the roots movement. I want us to consider how women directors created new aesthetic forms within Indian theatre, diverting from established conditions by discussing the work of Neelam Mansingh Chaudhary and the company Chandigarh. Adapted into Punjabi and other Indian languages and improvised upon by actors, performances directed by Neelam Mansingh Chaudhary exhibit an intermedial form that use actors' bodies and objects to communicate to audiences through multiple sensory modalities. Emerging out of collaborative and improvisational processes, performances of the company consist of a series of enactments in which objects, bodies, sound patterns, and other sensory elements are combined to communicate to audiences through the interaction of sensory modalities, producing a disorienting effect. Working with the Nakals, itinerant folk performers of Punjab, and local actors trained in drama schools, Chaudhary has developed a collaborative process of training and devising. She was not interested in incorporating the Nakals material or using their practice as an exotic leitmotif, but wanted to formalize a process of artistic collaboration between groups of people from separate worlds. Performances are created through rehearsals and collective improvisation, within which single stories, memories, and experiences of actors multiply and become part of the collective. Everyday objects from the domestic space gather on stage and are brought to life by actors in innovative ways. Speech, sound patterns, enactments, objects, body, movement, scenery, costumes, and natural elements are combined and juxtaposed in new ways to externalize and physicalize subliminal ideas, concepts, experiences, past structures, and other thoughts. The company's 2022 performance, Trunk Tales, is stitched together from improvisations based on memories, experiences, references, and everyday observations, and composed of four distinct stories that chronicle the experiences of nowhere people, people who don't really fit in. In a departure from the company's usual style, incorporating the songs of the Nakkals, movements, arresting visuals, and an ensemble of performers, Trunk Tales is a solo performance by Vansh Bhardwaj. The stories emerge out of trunks, that is, metal boxes used for storing objects, to address the politics of caste, gender, and class in contemporary society, centering experiences that are otherwise overlooked by audiences. Bhardwaj enters the stage with a stack of trunks, circumambulating with them around an arrangement of shallow water filled trays set on the floor. By changing into different costumes that Bhardwaj retrieves from each trunk, he reenacts four different stories that highlight underrepresented perspectives, switching between narrating and embodying characters within the story. In the first story, Bottle, raises questions about our accessibility to drinking water by exploring the experience of a migrant worker who's thirsty and wants to drink water. In experiencing thirst by performing exhaustion, followed by a moment of uncertainty about drinking the water that he places in front of him in a tumbler, the actor performs acts of disorientation that foreground the experience of an everyday activity such as drinking water. Through gestures and movements, the actor creates a caste based relationship with the audience, drawing attention to mechanisms of caste and class that govern accessibility to drinking water. Drawn from Invasion poem within Wesley Enoch and Deborah Mailman's Seven Stages of Grieving, in the second story, Angel, Bhardwaj tells a traumatic story of sexual violence, reanimating a ceramic fish as his co actor and switching between narrating and embodying characters within the story, using water to signify blood and tears. The ceramic fish is transformed into the lifeless body of Angel, and the actor's gestures of mourning remember her innocence. In Justice, the actor interrogates the plausibility of notions of food equality by juxtaposing contrasting experiences of eating food. The actor wears a suit and challenges and channels a character who has a dream called a justice of eating, in which everyone sits at a national table and eats together, irrespective of caste, class, religion, and gender. From the trunk, the actor extracts a thali containing real food, an elaborate meal with rice and multiple bowls containing dal and sabzi. Eating and speaking to the audience, the actor progressively transfers his leftovers into smaller and smaller plates, a metal quarter plate, a paper plate, and finally a newspaper, and washes his hands on the remaining scraps. Along with this, he changes costumes. The way that he wears his costumes, his posture, and sitting position and gestures channel characters belonging to different social backgrounds. Towards the end of the enactment, the actor embodies a man tormented by hunger who gladly accepts someone else's discarded food as his meal. The last story, Skirt, is about Vikas, a young man who is running away from home, and his mother's black skirt, a garment wearing which he finds himself, but because of which he has been ostracized from his home, his family, and his circle of friends. Vikas displays the skirt to the audience, telling them that it belonged to his mother. He drenches his mother's skirt in water and wears it meditatively, paying attention to its folds and gathers, glistening with water. He narrates his memories of wearing the skirt to the audience, his friends laughing at him, his father beating him with a stick, remembering the violence that forced him to leave home. Free at last, Vikas dances on the water, swishing his memory infused skirt, wears makeup that he retrieves from a plastic bag, and dances out of the stage. Through movement, sound, and visuals, and words, in Trunk Tales, the audience experiences a multi layered performance, fragmented into four distinct stories that emerge from trunks. The actor is transformed into a medium who embodies different characters by changing costumes. The multiple sensory and semiotic disorienting audiences. And in figuring out the meaning of enactments, audiences are confronted with mechanisms of orientation, including inequality in access to food and water, gender, sexuality, caste, and class. The improvisations that form trunk tales draw from multiple sources, displaying an intermedial and interdisciplinary overlapping of art forms. Another subliminal message emerges if we bring into focus a central object in the performance, the trunk. Placed strategically in the background of the stage, the trunk is the object that the stories emerge from, connecting them. In my larger work on this performance, I show how the trunk functions as a reorienting device, similar to the table in Sara Ahmed's conceptualization of queer phenomenology. A queer reading of the performance demonstrates how it evokes specters of the partition of 1947. While recollections of the partition in trunk tales are spectral, it nevertheless asks audiences to unearth those objects locked away in trunks in their own homes that might evoke stories of their migration and enable them to reorient themselves to acknowledge the unequal relations that characterize the present. Watching stories and objects from trunks come alive on stage, audiences are reminded of objects in trunks in their own homes, animating conversations about these objects and the memories associated with them. The ubiquity of digital technology since the late 1990s and early 2000s led to its entry into the stage space, creating unprecedented forms of intermediality within Indian theatre. These new forms of post-dramatic theatre, which Hans Thies Lehmann defines as performances that move beyond the dramatic structure, combine live performances with other kinds of media and varied real-time experiences, creating new, radically politically engaged aesthetic forms that enable a politics of perception through intermediality. Performers also combine theater with other disciplines and art forms, creating new forms of performance that lie somewhere between art installation, theater, storytelling, performance art, and documentary practice. Here, I want to discuss Sri Vamsi Matta's performances, which many of us might have attended at the annual conference of South Asia in 2023. Vamsi is a theater actor, writer, and director based in Bangalore, and he spent a year in Madison as the 2023-2024 Interdisciplinary Artist in Residence at UW-Madison, and he was co-hosted by the Center for South Asia. He taught a class on power relations in art, collaborated to create performances with interdisciplinary artists, and performed in his own shows. In Come Eat With Me, Vamsi tells stories exploring the nuanced relationship between caste and food, addressing the historical and contemporary significance of Dalit cuisine through oral history, personal experiences from his family and community, and literary scholarship on caste and food. The performance space consists of a table containing photographs of Vamsi's inspirations, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his mother, and a painting by his friend. Vamsi sits on a chair placed in the performance space and talks directly to the audience. His stories reveal to audiences the different ways in which Dalit people face discrimination and violence because of food and drink, and reveal to audiences facets of contemporary life that they might not have considered before. He asks questions, prompting audiences to respond verbally, and invites the audience to share their own experiences with caste and food. At the end of the performance, audiences are invited to share a meal with Vamsi, taste the multi-layered flavor of the stories that he narrated, and share their own experiences related to Vamsi's stories. The intermediality of the performance lies in its combination of theater with storytelling, stand-up comedy, and cooking. Vamsi's culminating performance at UW-Madison, Can a Song Be a Revolution?, was a collaborative performance in which interdisciplinary artists from Madison respond to the songs of Gaddar, the revolutionary poet and performer from Telangana, using diverse art forms ranging from jazz, hip-hop, stand-up comedy, dance, and song, and other genres familiar to an American audience. Vamsi met his collaborators in different ways during his time in Madison and had planned on performing Gaddar's translations of Gaddar's songs in English along with local performers. As he met with artists individually and shared some of Gaddar's songs, they started responding to it in their own ways, and the performance came together organically. In the performance, Vamsi tells the audience about Gaddar and performs as the MC, introducing different artists and prefacing their performances by reading out the songs by Gaddar that they were responding to. Some of the responses included the Ballad of Anthony Crawford by Kwanda, a combination of song and poetry about the death of her ancestor, an excerpt from Zara's book, a choreo poem consisting of dance and poetry by Natalia, a rap about a microphone by Jason, a musical composition sampling Gaddar's song by Pawan Benjamin, stand up comedy about indigenous existence in the US by Casey Brown, among others. At the end of the performance, Vamsi asks the audience to join the performers as they dance together, moving around the stage in a circle. This performance exemplifies many of the practices of intermediality that I have discussed in this lecture. A collaborative method of creating performances combining the work of interdisciplinary artists, translation, adaptation, and multilingualism, the staging of digital technology in the use of projections and sound effects, communication via multiple sensory modalities, and combining theater with other disciplines and practices. In addition to these intermedial practices, I also spoke about the movement of narratives across media boundaries and continuities and connections that exist between theater and film. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.